Alright, so unless you've ironically been living in a sewer for the last couple of months, you're probably aware that we've got a new adaptation of Stephen King's It coming out this September. Again, you have to call it an adaptation because if you use the term remake, all the internet horror nerds get really mad at you. So yeah, a lot of people are excited about this and for good reason. I mean, for starters, it's one of those things where it doesn't look like it's a carbon copy of the 1990 TV miniseries. And just from what we've seen so far from the trailer, it looks like it's going to be slightly more authentic to Stephen King's original novel than the old Tim Curry miniseries from way back in the day. Now, of course, that's not to say that everything about this movie is going to be 100% authentic and, faithful to Stephen King's novel. I mean, for starters, the book itself was set in the 1950s, and from the looks of it, the upcoming movie looks like it's set in the 1980s. But even still, I mean, there's a lot of, really sort of neat touches and Easter eggs that we saw in the little teaser trailer that came out from the movie a couple of weeks ago. That looks like, it's going to be a little bit more in-depth. It's going to cover more territory than the old TV miniseries, and that is a good reason to be excited. Now, by that same token, if you've never actually read it, it's a pretty explicit novel. I mean, there's a lot of, hyper-violence, a lot of extremely unnerving sexual content. So I think it's kind of safe to assume that they really can't do a full translation of the novel just because, the MPAA would give an NC-17 rating and this will be able to be shown in regular theaters. And of course, if you're already spending $68 million on the movie and you're trying to get financing rolling for, another movie, a follow-up a couple of years from now, or maybe even a year, I'm not really sure the time frame is, you're going to try to keep it R at best, so it's accessible to the rest of the audiences. Well, anyway, recently I did a little article for bloodydisgusting.com, and there's a link to it down in the comments section, or more info, whatever you want to call it, in which I've said, there's going to be a lot of things carried over from King's original 1986 novel, but there are 10 things which I think are either going to be completely eschewed from the upcoming adaptation coming out this September, or is going to be downplayed considerably. So without further ado, let's just hop into it. These are the 10 things that I'm assuming more than likely aren't going to be included in the upcoming It adaptation, which was included in the novel. Alright, so first things first. There's a character named Ben, and you remember from the miniseries, if you've never read the book. Oh, by the way, I should probably say this up front. There's going to be a lot of spoilers if you haven't read the novel. So if you're trying to finish the book and don't know what happens, tune out when the video's over, because you want to hear what I have to say. So anyway, Ben, he's a character, and the book he's described as being overweight, and it's the 1950s, where not everybody was morbidly obese like they are today, and of course he gets fat shamed quite a bit. And there's actually a passage pretty early on in the book where all the kids reconnect after all these years apart, and he kind of tells a story about how his gym coach grabbing his chesticles, which is a form of sexual assault on a child. I think that kind of goes without saying. Sort of is what inspired him to lose weight and come out and become a really athletic, world famous architect or something. So anyway, I think it's one of those things where the fat shaming, I mean, it's too central to the character and his plot, and the whole point of the movie is kind of exploring the neurosis of childhood. So I think there's going to be some bullying about him being fat, but it's not going to be as extensive, because in the novel, even his friends made fun of him, not just the bullies. So I think it's going to be part of the movie, but it's going to be downplayed and not going to be a really huge plot point because body positivity is in, and you just can't have that stuff nowadays. Okay, secondly, now this is something that would be a very interesting bridge to the follow-up movie, because from what I've gathered so far, they're trying to do a Kill Bill Volume 1, Volume 2 thing, where this is the first movie covers the 1980s, and then the follow-up presumably takes place in the modern day when all the kids have grown up. And one of the early indications that we know Pennywise or Bob Gray, whatever you want to call the character, is back in business after, being dormant for, about 27 years, is that there's a scene where there's a homosexual couple who are leaving Derry's Gay Bar, and they're confronted by a bunch of, homophobic teens, and they get into a little rumble, and during it, it emerges from the waterfront, takes a big chunk out of the eventual murder victim. So the kids, they're put on trial for homicide, and, all the witnesses, the gay lover, the teens attack the guy, they're all telling the investigators the same thing. There's this clown who came out and bit him. And basically there's this whole, meandering sort of a chapter, about the case and everything going to trial. And eventually the investigator tells him, do not bring up the clown at all whatsoever in the trial. And I think that'd be like a really good way to sort of, transition from the first movie to the second movie. But the thing is, the characters, they're really inconsequential. They never show up again in the novel. I mean, it does take a lot of time to kind of get going. And again, I mean, there's just way too many homophobic slurs included in the passage, which don't really fly in the modern era. So I think it'd be a very good transitional piece to bridge movie 1 to movie 2, but it just takes up too much time, and I don't think it's going to end up happening. All right, number 3. So, back in the 1950s, the ideas of kids smoking cigarettes and, carrying guns, not considered, socially taboo as bad as it was, today. I mean, even go back to the 1980s. I mean, you had Stand By Me and the kids were smoking and, packing heat and shooting stuff. So it was a different time in the 50s, even a different time in the 1980s, but nowadays, of course, with the gun control contingent and the anti-tobacco lobby, I think I could be mistaken here, but I think the MPAA actually considers films that involve cigarette smoking like automatic R material, like or at least a PG-13. It's something. It's a really big hit on your overall MPAA rating if you have smoking, especially involving kids. And since kids and guns and kids and smoking aren't really considered acceptable behavior nowadays, I think we're going to understand that in the movie. All right, so sage life advice from a giant tortoise. That's the fourth thing I think is going to be in the movie that was actually in the novel. Bear with me, if you haven't read the novel and you only have the miniseries to go on, you're going to be completely lost. I read the book, and to be honest, I'm still completely lost. All right, so when it happens at the very end of the book, when the kids are actually fighting it, and kind of a spoiler, it ends up taking like a giant, praying mantis, or sort of like a spidery, sinewy kind of, alien queen form. Oh, pardon for me, I need to get a drink here. You should never record while I parch. I've actually had to do this video 3 times now because the audio keeps cutting off. So, yeah, glad to get that over with. Alright, so anyway, yeah, going back to the original novel, there's a part where the kids, they're fighting it, and it's in its spider form, just like it was in the miniseries. Now, of course, whether or not it's in the same form in the upcoming movie has yet to be seen. We'll find out. But right before the kids are killed by it, they're actually confronted by a giant celestial turtle. Yes, you heard me correct. A giant intergalactic turtle shows up. And to be fair, King does a pretty good job explaining how this turtle, and it's described as having like entire galaxies for toenails. So I don't even know like how that's possible, like how you make that work in a motion picture form. I mean, it works in the novel because it's kind of trippy and you're in a sort of like a phantasmagoric realm. But I just don't know how that's possible. I mean, can you imagine like, the kids are fighting a spider and then all of a sudden like a giant turtle with like a stone surfer dude voice comes out and like gives them advice on grad school or whatever he does in the novel? I mean, it just wouldn't work. I mean, it barely works in the novel. It certainly doesn't work in movie form, so that's just not going to happen. All right, number 5. This is actually a little bit different because we know this is actually going to be included in the movie, but I think they're going to downplay certain elements. All right, so in the novel, there is a sequence where a kid is chased by a leper. Now, whether or not it's a real leper, kind of up in the air. I think it's kind of the way it's described. It's actually more of a syphilitic hobo. So we're going to see that in the movie. We saw it in the teaser trailer, so it's going to be a part of the movie. One thing I'm pretty sure you will not be seeing, though, is the leper saying some really sexually abusive things towards the cast. And he says some horrific things. So the leper will be in there, but the leper trying to, goad children into really horrible, disgusting, illegal things, probably going to be a casualty in the novel to script translation. And I think a lot of the dialogue of Pennywise is really, really raunchy in the book, and that'll be changed as well, but that kind of goes without saying. Alright, number 6. Now, this one's actually pretty interesting. In the original novel, there's actually a couple of sequences where it, as a shapeshifter, changes forms, and he changes into all sorts of different movie villains. He turns into Frankenstein's monster and kills the kid. He turns into the creature from the Black Lagoon and kills the kid. He turns into the titular werewolf from I Was a Teenage Werewolf. Towards the end, he actually turns into the crawling eye of all the obscure B-horror movie characters you can turn into. He turns into that towards the end. And obviously because it's a novel and you don't have to really worry about the aesthetics. Like copyright's kind of weird. You can describe something, but actually show it and make money off of it in a more visual, tangible, upfront medium is against copyright for whatever reason. So just for the fact that this movie's been produced by Warner Brothers and Frankenstein and Creature from the Black Lagoon, the characters we all know and love, or at least their common visual appearance are trademarked by them, odds are we're not going to be seeing those characters in the upcoming adaptation. Now, this is an interesting pros I want to throw out. Warner Brothers does hold like a majority share over New Line Cinema, which means technically, if it wanted to turn into, oh, say, Freddy Krueger, there's nothing legally prohibiting that from happening, which I think would be awesome. And in fact, I actually called that. I think it's going to happen. There's like a scene where the kids go see the first Elm Street movie and they get freaked out and it turns into Freddy Krueger at one point. Maybe Robert Englund will reprise role. That'd be fantastic. I think that will be in the movie, but the Universal monsters and stuff, not going to happen. All right, number 7. The Easter egg hunt subplot. All right, how to describe this one? Okay, so in the novel, we learn that it, or Pennywise, Bob Gray, goes by all these different names. Every 27 years, he goes out and he eats a bunch of children, and of course, his feeding session always concludes with like some huge, like high body count sort of thing. Like one year, there was a flood that killed a whole bunch of people. One year, a nightclub caught fire and lots of people died. Well, there's another story King alludes to pretty early on in the book. Like in the early 1900s, there were a bunch of kids at the annual dairy Easter egg hunt, and the ironworks nearby exploded, and about 80 kids got blown to smithereens. And I think, we're getting to the point where we can accept a lot more aggressive and abrasive stuff in the media. I mean, we see daily bloodshed in and out, people getting shot on Facebook all the time. So I think we're a little bit more accustomed to stuff like that. But then again, you got to remember, this is Warner Brothers making the movie. I mean, they did Harry Potter, they did a Lego movie. I have a hard time believing they're going to be okay with kids' guts flying through trees. So for that alone, I think the entire subplot will be deleted. I mean, it might be referenced. I mean, there might be some allusions to it, but you're not going to be seeing kids, with their guts hanging out of, cedar trees or their heads blown off. It's just not going to happen. Not going to fly with today's audiences. All right, number 8. Okay, the big bully character in it is a guy named Henry Bowers. And, in the book, he's just a complete jerk to the kids. And he ends up getting a knife sent to him by, Pennywise or Ed or Bob Gray. He goes to all the different names, in case you're wondering. They're all kind of interchangeable. So he gets a knife in the mail, and he kills his dad, and he gets accused of killing some other people, and he spends most of his life in a mental institution. Of course, Pennywise, breaks them out so they can go kill the rest of the kids when they're adults. So anyway, I bring all that up to say he's bad, but he's not even the worst character in his own clique. That goes to a character named Patrick Hockstetter. Patrick Hockstetter is a very, very peculiar little kid. I think he's described as killing his younger brother, like smothering it in a crib when he was an infant. And really, I mean, it gets weirder and worse from there. Like, there's this subplot about his after-school activity being stealing people's pets and putting them in junkyard refrigerators and basically pleasuring himself to the thought of them dying. So yeah, he's a messed up kid, and there's this one part where he goes to the junkyard with Henry, and he tries to sort of goad him into sexual behavior, and they light farts together. Not going to happen. We're not going to be seeing that in the movie, so don't even think about it. It's just, I mean, they'll probably have some allusion to Hockstetter, like, being an animal torturer, but all the sexual stuff, not going to happen. All right, number 9, pretty obvious one, I think, because we live in that cultural climate where the idea of a monster clown eating kids is all right, but the idea of, a little child being assailed by the N-word does not even, that's like the most socially taboo thing you can even think of having in a movie. That's probably going to be excised. In the novel, since the movie was set in the 1950s, and it focused on a black character, and he's like the only black kid like in a predominantly white town in New England in the 1950s, of course, there's going to be a whole lot of, racially deplorable language used against that character throughout the book. And I think even the miniseries didn't really include it. But, in the novel, I mean, he's just assailed by all these terrible racial slurs. And even like from some of his friends, like his friends, the kids, they're supposed to root for, do some pretty un-PC things. Like there's a part where Richie does like a minstrel show voice, and they really enjoy casually using the N-word. And Pennywise himself says some very racially derogatory things throughout the novel. And I think all that stuff just isn't going to fly with today's audiences. It's probably going to get excluded from the novel adaptation coming up this September. All right, and 10. This one should go without saying. If you've actually ever read the novel, you'll know there is some really weird stuff going on towards the end. All right, there's no way to sugarcoat it, so I'm going to come out and say it directly and get it over with. Towards the end of the book, there is a scene where, all the kids, they finally defeat it, and they're going through the sewers and they get lost. They don't know how to get out, so Beverly, the one girl, the Smurfette of the club, comes up with a very unusual way to make the best of a bad situation. She says, "Hey guys, I got an idea. How about you all run a train on me? And if you have to Urban Dictionary that one, God help you." So yeah, basically the book deteriorates into like a 3 or 4 page long description of a bunch of elementary schools basically having an orgy. It happened. I don't know why it's in the book. I mean, Stephen King later has said, well, that scene was supposed to be symbolic of the transition from childhood to adulthood. But my personal opinion is, back in the day, Stephen King did a lot of cocaine, and his books made so much money his publishers wouldn't edit it. So, for whatever reason, it's one of the most historic and beloved horror classics of the 1980s devolves into basically like To Catch a Predator material. Well, anyway, the idea of, 5th graders and 6th graders doing that kind of stuff, not going to happen. I'm not even sure, it's technically legal to even, film stuff like that. Even, working your way around it. It's just not going to happen. It's just too out there. It's just too much of a red herring. It's just too much. Just put it that way. And American audiences are not going to be cool with that, and it jeopardizes the sequel, and there's just no way the MPA would allow it. There's no way the movie studio would allow it. And frankly, it's such an out there scene. It kind of detracts from the overall impact of, it being killed and the kids moving on to adulthood. So it's not going to be in there. All right. So those are just my sort of ideas about what I think is going to be in the movie adaptation. This is going to carry over from the novel. What's going to be discarded? Like I said, I got the Bloody Disgusting article down there. Check it out for more information. And yeah, that's pretty much all there is to say. There's going to be some things carried over from the novel. There's going to be some things excluded. We'll have to find out this September, and I, for one, am looking forward to returning to the sewers.